All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Artificial Intelligence in Schools webinar hosted by CSBA's AI Task Force. I'm Andrew Keller. I'm the Senior Director of Executive Office Operations and Strategic Initiatives, and I'm really excited to help staff this task force. But this is one of our webinars that we'll be offering up to our membership. And we're really excited to dive into some of the topics today, and you'll hear from some members of the task force, some real world experience and scenarios, and we'll talk about policies, as I know is one of the main questions out there about what do you do with artificial intelligence. So I'll start by introducing the rockstar group of panelists we have here from our very own state. I'm Andrew Keller, Senior Director in the Executive Office, Operations and Strategic Initiatives, and I'll turn it over to Josh.
Thanks, Andrew. Josh Daniels, Chief of the Policy and Governance Technology Services Department here at CSBA. Thanks for having me.
Susan.
Susan Markarian, immediate past president of CSBA and board member, Pacific Union Elementary School.
Good morning. I'm Soil Katal, Chief Information Officer for Los Angeles Unified School District.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Kimberly McGrath. I am superintendent for Reed Union School District.
Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for carving out time in your day to join us here. And again, thank you to those of you joining us virtually for this webinar. So as you know, if you've been on a CSBA webinar before, we do a little bit of housekeeping right up front. At the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers. So please use the Q&A button down there in Zoom at the very bottom of your screen to type your questions. That's a place where we'll log your questions and we'll come back to them at the end and make sure we get all of those answered. Either we'll answer them live or one of the presenters will answer them if it gets a little specific and we want to make sure that answer gets a little airtime. And then all attendees, of course, will receive a link to the recording as well as the slide deck after the fact. We know that's always a question that comes up, even when we say it up front, but please feel confident that you will get the slides, you will get the recording, so you can share this widely and at large with your colleagues. So what we'll be doing today is talking really about this world of AI governance. I'll give a little welcome and overview to set the stage, and then we'll dive into some of the guiding documents that are really important in this governance conversation with this technology. Specifically, we'll talk about policies and resolutions as some of your key documents in the governing world. And then we'll dive into what I think is probably one of the most interesting pieces here, which is the real world scenarios around AI. You'll hear some from some of the panelists here about what they've encountered in the field and kind of help make all this sort of nebulous conversation more real so you can make sense of it in your boardrooms. And then we'll do our Q&A session and we'll share a little bit of contact information at the end. So moving on, I'll go ahead and start with a little stage setting here. So this is kind of a little background, and I want to make sure everyone's on the same page before we dive in here. I think the first question in this little diagram here is, what is artificial intelligence? Well, AI, as it's referred to, refers to computer systems that are designed to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, such as understanding language or recognizing patterns, making decisions. And that's as opposed to computer systems that we've known for years that sort of stay in their lane and simply do what you tell them without much thinking. Things like Excel, PowerPoint, your student information system, and so on. The thing is that many of you may already interact with AI daily, where you have an app like ChatGPT to answer your questions, figure out a tactful email response, or help slap together a last-minute dinner with whatever you have left in the fridge because you forgot to hit the store on the way home. AI also includes a wide range of less obvious but still wildly powerful technologies behind the scene that you may not see. That's things like personalized learning platforms or data analysis tools that your educators use to tailor instruction to student needs. And that's kind of important, that AI is very often behind the scenes and has been for years. And this is in things like the recommendations you get when you're looking for same-day delivery items on Amazon that you also forgot to get on the way home. But that really, to us, tells that there's this sense of urgency here, and that's where the task force came in. These things are already here, and now they're just getting more in your face. And we're seeing it pop up everywhere. So your Google searches have AI appearing in it. It now appears if you open a PDF, whether you like it or not, you can't even see it. AI is now in your life. So because of this, CSBA's board of directors and then President Susan Markarian, who's here with us today, felt it was urgent to assemble the task force to help board members make sense of this technology from a governance perspective. Now, there's already a ton of stuff out there. You've seen too much stuff, really. So the task force decided to focus on what was missing for board members specifically. Not surprising. Most of the stuff that's already out there is focused on students and classroom use. So, how do you keep your kids from cheating using ChatGPT, right? Well, the big gap for board members that the task force uncovered really was this key question that no one really seemed to be answering. How do you actually figure out and put in place the policies that you need to govern this new technology? So the task force dug in with our chief, Josh Daniels here, who will take over in a second here, to really answer this question. And really, the answer seems like you already have most of the relevant policies in place. AI isn't really something so new and different that it requires a new separate set of policies, which is the last box here, but it's something that needs to be integrated into the policies you already have. So I hope that gives you a little bit of comfort and confidence that we're not throwing something entirely new out here. You can move forward with this given what you've got on the ground. So I'm going to hand it over to Josh next to talk about the sample policies most of you now have access to. But again, that's the key philosophy underpinning the work that you'll hear about today, that we're integrating AI into what we already do. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, so I'm going to talk for a few minutes and then pass it over to Susan. Next slide, please. All right, so we use the term policy to talk about a variety of actual types of policies. And we want to give you a little bit of background before we jump into the AI-related policies themselves. So we have a board policy, which is what the board adopts, and that's how you set policy direction for your LEA. And then those BPs are implemented through administrative regulations, ARs, usually by the superintendent and usually at the discretion of the superintendent. So on occasion, you might have a school district here or there, or a county board that adopts ARs in some sense, but typically that is the role of the superintendent. And then you have exhibits, which are sort of forms or notices or sort of other important information or documents connected to the policy, the board policy. And then you have board bylaws, which are very specific board policies that set the rules and procedures for the board itself. So now that we have sort of our terms, and all of these sort of are accompanied by the word policy, as opposed to specifically BP or AR. But these are all samples, right? So these are not an endpoint for an LEA, but a starting point. So you can download the sample or the updates to the sample, and then you can decide as an LEA whether or not you want to adopt those updates word for word or make changes to them. My sense is that if you're really reviewing them, some policy changes you'll adopt word for word, and some say, I think we would take a slightly different approach. Our samples and the updates to our samples have gone through legal review, but they're not legal advice for LEAs. They could become quickly out of date, and so it's important that if you are wanting to ensure that they are legally compliant, that you speak with your own legal counsel about that, upon adoption. Next slide, please. Okay, so just now that you have the background, just wanted to give you that context. I always like to say that before we jump into any sample policy. As Andrew mentioned, we have incorporated concepts of AI into existing sample policies, and these are the 5 that sort of are most relevant to sort of the AI discussion and that we have updated. So 4040 is the employee use of technology policy. It sort of is a companion to the bottom one, which is 6163.4, student use of technology. And both of those talk about how the respective people, employees or students, are allowed to use district technology. I'm not going to go into to super detail about each one. We have a whole separate sort of webinar where we go over all of the policy updates, including these, but I'll just sort of hit some of the highlights. So for each of those, we have added language about AI and sort of the proper use. And can we go back a slide, please? There we go. So for the employee use of technology, there was general recognition that AI is already being used. And so the general approach in the sample policy was to take, if you have a spectrum between more restrictive or more permissive, this policy sort of tends to be on the more permissive side, but with a couple of big restrictions. There are some obvious restrictions like, copyright, things like that. but certainly student privacy, and student records is a big one. So employees need to be very careful uploading student records to an AI platform without a corresponding or contract between the LEA and the AI service provider. Because otherwise you do that and you have simply disclosed student information and you violated FERPA and a whole bunch of other, privacy laws. So there's a few other constraints, but the general sort of orientation in that policy is, we think that there is benefits to the potential of AI. We want to flag the major drawbacks, restrict their use in that area, but otherwise sort of allow the technology to be used. Then the next policy is academic honesty. And in fact, the student use of technology for the most part, and actually all the other three, homework and makeup work, student assessment, and student use of technology, for the most part, reference some of the key concepts you'll find in academic honesty. And, we typically have thought of cheating, as plagiarism, which really is sort of, if you look into the sort of the origins of that term and that concept, really is about theft. So you go and you take somebody else's work and you steal it, you thieve it, right? And then you sort of claim it as your own. Well, in the AI context, that sense of plagiarism is not really accurate. It doesn't really work because you're not stealing anything from any individual person that owns it, right? So it's not theft. It really is more about fraud. And so when we think about AI use and cheating in the academic context, we really need to sort of shift our thinking about it away from plagiarism and more towards fraud, because you really are representing your work as truly yours when in some contexts it may not be yours, right? Here is, there's, the very famous or infamous example, right, of the attorney that, sort of submitted their brief and they used AI and they didn't double check any of the citations. And so the citations were just made up. So that's not to say that AI couldn't help a student in some contexts, and others will talk about what that might be later on. But that if the student is misrepresenting how they completed the work, then that is fraud. Then related to that, sort of think about what is the purpose, or why are we concerned about AI? Well, fundamentally, the concern is that the students are not learning the standards that the LEA wants them to learn, and that the AI use is getting in the way of that. And so the policy was written with that in mind, so that if AI can augment the ability of a student to learn the standards, then by all means, it should be utilized in that context. But if it is getting in the way or replacing that learning, then that is where the concern is. And that might be different from LEA to LEA or classroom to classroom or topic to topic. And then the last thing I'll just note about the academic honesty policy is that it does include some due process protections for students. If an AI is used to detect cheating, then the policy says, well, then the student must be made aware of that. Just, so that is, if the student has some concerns, there are some AI detectors that, tend to not be sort of, there's studies that say that, for English assignments, the AI detector misdiagnoses the use of AI at a higher rate for English language learners, for EL students. So, we wanted to provide some due process protections for students, at the same time not prohibiting the use of AI, in the context of detecting plagiarism. So hopefully that gives you some sense of what the 5 policies cover, and I will turn it over to Susan for the rest of this section.
Good morning. Again, my name is Susan Markarian. I have had the honor of being the chair of the CSBA AI Task Force. I am a trustee at the Pacific Union Elementary School. I'll tell you a little bit about my district. I am from a small rural agricultural area in Fresno County. We service about 340 students, TK through 8th grade. We're just a one school site. We pull students from a very large rural agricultural area. The majority of my students are second language learners, and they are coming primarily from farm worker families. You've just heard from Josh about some of the important updates to Gamut policies that him and his team have created for us related to the inclusion of AI content. I'd like to talk a little about the importance of policy adoption at the local level. At my small LEA, we do not have any technology experts on staff. We've not been able to hire any technology experts, so we just kind of manage the best we can. We are small, so we have a superintendent principal who is the head of all of the departments. Integration of AI into the district is very important, and reviewing and adopting policies that Josh has referred to relating to academic honesty, homework and makeup work, student assessment, students' use of technology, the employee use of technology were very important to our district in our AI journey. Policy adoption is one of the most important duties of board members. In our district, we take that very seriously. My governance team, we get that Gamut, CSBA Gamut policy quarterly. At almost every single board meeting, we schedule either a first reading or a second reading of a portion of those policies. So we are constantly on top of our policy adoption. It is important for board members to understand their policies. It's important to establish a routine and regularly review your policy content. It's just keeps your district safe and keeps everybody doing what the board intends for them to be doing. During the first and second readings, we engage in discussion that center on the content of the proposed policy. We include suggestions. We tweak the policy, or we leave it as it is if it's suitable for what we do. We ensure that it is locally relevant to our districts. Many times we suggest changes to the language based on what is best for our students and staff members. This practice ensures that our policies are reviewed and updated in a very timely manner. At the first and second readings, we move to adoptions. It's important to my district to know that the policies are being adopted and that our manual is staying current. We regularly adopt new policy to ensure that the LEA is both protected and has the infrastructure in place to ensure smooth operation of our district. We don't have this backup support, so we desperately rely on our policies to keep our district safe from legal and other distractions. We get regular updates from the superintendent on implementation of policies, so we can track and ensure that the policies we adopt are at the forefront of the work our staff is engaged in. Without full implementation, adopted policies are meaningless and do not help districts do the work and to fulfill the district mission. Based on my experience as a veteran trustee of 39 years, I believe that policy adoption is one of the most important duties of district. Every district should take their policy adoption very seriously and keep their policies current. In addition to policy adoption, many of the larger LEAs regularly adopt resolutions in order to strengthen community relationship and clearly communicate where the LEA stands on different topics. This is when you're serving large communities, a resolution is a much better way. And when you have large staffs, it enables the staff to know what the direction the board wants them to go in. There have many LEAs who have adopted AI policies across the state, and many of those resolutions have been collected, and we have featured them on our AI task force webpage so that our members can see examples of what those resolutions entail. While my district does not govern by resolution, and many small districts don't, there are some advantages to using these documents to communicate priorities, both internally and externally. Here to talk more about that is the Los Angeles School District, Sahil Katal. Sahil, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Um, so before we start talking about the resolution, I just want to tie the knots about what we discussed about the policy to the resolution. The policy is the forefront of the activity at the schools. Essentially, it's what informs a superintendent and the school executive and people that they are doing administration at the schools, how to perform those works. In the opposite side, the resolution is a macro level policy, which essentially define the guidelines for the district administrations, and it creates a foundational framework for that work. And it typically is not that specific to the implementation, but it's defined criteria around it. What are the big pillars, for example, for policies that need to be addressed? So that's in notion is the definition of the resolution in this perspective. The second part is why do we need a resolution? Obviously, we develop resolution not just in AI, but in any other area to prevent inconsistency in practices that may exist within the organization or departments or schools. We want to make sure everybody follow the same process and, as I said, macro level policy. And when do we need it? When there is a gap. It's not like every day the policy resolution is needed. As Susan mentioned, smaller school districts, usually this can be resolved by the discussion, communication, better collaboration between the groups. In the larger organization, the resolution create that uniform conversation between the board members that ultimately create that framework. But if there is no gap in the policy, if the school administrator already addressed the gap, then probably that doesn't necessary to have a resolution. And the last part, which is the most important portion of this AI work, is how and what are the contexts of that resolution when we want to develop or create a resolution. There are a study, there research need to be done about the resolution. So make sure those resolution is aligned with the state, federal, and also local jurisdiction practices that is happening in that organization. Obviously, it's implementable. You want to make sure the resolution is something that can sustain and stay, and also is unanimous across the board members in order to stay alive. Going to the detail of the sections and tying back to what Josh was discussing, some of those elements already defined by the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education. The biggest element that we see on most of the example cases is around data privacy and security. So really the policies that the district is developed, which can be guided by the resolution, can emphasize the how to protect or to what level district need to protect the confidential, sensitive, and privileged information. That's a very important component. You probably saw a lot of example of that in your district, and you will see in our example cases in the presentation with my other colleagues. The next part is around access and equity. I mean, we are a school district. We always want to make sure we provide equitable access to any resources and technology that exists to make sure all our students can benefit from. And it's a key component as it defined and outlined by Department of Education as well. We need to consider it as part of AI. If we eliminate access for the AI for the specific, for the group of a student, there are still privileged access exists outside of our environment for other students. So which that by itself create inequity. So we need to make sure that equitable access exists, either it's a device, technology, connectivity, all of those are part of the same scenario. The next part is about academic integrity, as Josh mentioned, as part of the academic honesty. Honestly, is exactly the same conversation. And it goes back to the instructional practices, how we are teaching, how we are learning, and how we are communicating those materials with our schools administrator, teachers, and everybody else. And that academic integrity, as it defined, is essentially need to be applied to the permissible use of the AI. What are the part of the AI that we can use without really breaking that honesty? But at the same time, where are the areas that we need to be aware and be more protective? So the resolution can address these areas as well. Accuracy and credibility. I mean, we all know that the AI, we heard this probably word around hallucinate. It may take things wrong. It may not be most of the time correct. So with that, we need to be aware and it need to be part of our practices to not to consider AI product as the a valid product in education just by the sake of it that's coming from the machine or from the computer. And the last one is the bias. We need to be mindful. The algorithms that exist in the AI, they usually confirm the pre-existing biases, and they create or they learn from those inequities, and they try to apply it to the future projection that they are doing. So we need to have a transparent access to the back end of the implementation of AI tools to be able to confirm and make sure that the result of the product of the AI are not biased. There are many examples of this when applying AI to the data and analytics. We know that the demographic is a big factor, and as a result, that creates a biased approach on AI model. And there are other areas of the AI when it comes to the graphics and other areas like generating images and everything else. Same the same as the bias is going to create inconsistency with the implementation. Ultimately, there's 5 pillars that's checkmarked over here. These are the 5 pillars that across the industry everybody is talking about, and are the essentially areas that we need to develop a risk assessment and make sure protect and prevent, either through policy, through practice, through tools, or any other way that we can. We need to be essentially aware of this and implement it into our day-to-day implementation of AI across the organization. So with that, I'm handing it over, I believe, to Joshua. Oh, Andrew.
Yeah, I'll take it from there.
Okay.
Thank you, Sohail. I think one of the really interesting things that you talked about is that piece about when do you do a resolution and when you have a gap in those policies or there's emerging issues. I think that's something that boards are going to be frankly, have already been dealing with, where it's not quite clear where, which policies apply when they encounter a certain scenario. So that's one of the things we wanted to spend a little time on here. And Dr. McGrath from Reed Union School District is going to help kind of color in that a little bit. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about what we've put on the web. So one of the things that the task force did that is, I think, super cool and innovative at a national level is they generated a really long list of scenarios that they've already encountered in the field that relate to AI. And the idea is, what do you do with these scenarios? If you're a board member and you're encountering it for the first time, wow, it would be really nice to have some kind of tool from CSBA you could go and at least say, all right, what is this situation similar to? And what policy areas might we want to think about, whether in answering the question of whether we have a policy to address it. So what we did is we documented all of that, and then we added these columns to the right that identify the relevant policy area for that scenario. So that's basically the concept. So on the left side of this document, and again, you can go to csba.org/AI, and you can get access to this document. It's right there on that page, or if it's further down on the scenarios and cases link on the left. But you'll be able to pull this up. It's a PDF. You can print it out and use it. It's a fairly long list. I think there's about 20 odd scenarios in here, and even the first scenario is broken out into sort of 5 sub scenarios. But that's the idea. We've given you some definitions about what those policy areas might be. You should already have policies here. And so the way you would use this document in answering that question is you'd go down the list and find what scenario you're dealing with or something similar, and then you'd move across the columns to the right and look where the blue shading is and say, all right, so let's say I'm dealing with a student who developed, I'm looking at 1C here. I know it's a little hard to read, but when you pull it up, you can look at 1C, which is a student develops the main points for an essay assignment and asks ChatGPT for suggestions to improve their draft. The student gets the suggestions to improve the essay and then submits it. So you want to ask yourself, all right, well, what questions should we consider as a board around that? Well, there's questions of cheating and plagiarism. That's the first column. And then there's also questions about accountability and transparency. And both of those were things that Josh touched on earlier, and they're addressed in your sample policies that you have access to. So that's the idea. What we'll be doing as a task force moving forward is creating a facilitation guide for an activity that the board can do to go through these lists and say, hey, are we already dealing with this scenario? And how do we want to respond? Do we have a policy in place for, cheating and plagiarism and accountability and transparency in that scenario? And if we do, then maybe we can rate that one green and say, yeah, we're okay with that use of it. And then you can publish that list of all the different uses and scenarios that your board feels are okay to run ahead with. So we'll be producing that hopefully before the end of the year here, but it's a really great example. What I want to do next is kind of give you some real world experience here. Well, I'm not going to do that. Dr. McGrath is going to do that. So I want to turn it over to her to share a little bit about what the real world governing scenario usage looks like in the real world. So Dr. McGrath.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I think about from a board and an administrative perspective, I thought of these three, or I think 4 areas here to think about how you could utilize those scenarios and what that would look like. So I think about number 1 from a proactive planning and policy development. Just starting from reading and understanding, kind of analyze the scenarios. Some of them you will have thought about already, and some of them may be new to you, where you think, oh, I hadn't thought about AI being used in that manner before. So, think about how that is utilized within your organization. And as Andrew mentioned, maybe where your board stands on the use of that. Also celebrating, in our district, we're starting with, let's celebrate, let's applaud the ways that AI can create efficiencies, can create individualization, the ability to meet student needs. And some of those scenarios might spark some of those ideas for you. Also, identify potential challenges. So look at the scenarios to kind of anticipate issues that may arise from AI implementation. Think about, as Sahil said, data privacy concerns, any ethical dilemmas, maybe limitations of your technology. Also kind of developing integrated policies. So, Josh and Andrew mentioned how the scenarios can be used to inform kind of the integration of this AI concept within policies, not as a standalone. But thinking about the responsible use, think about including student access, think about teacher training or educator training, content filtering, those pieces. And then I would also encourage, think about the scenarios of how it could, kind of inform you around allocating resources. So determining your necessary resources, including maybe budget allocation or staffing. How are you supporting AI initiatives and addressing the potential challenges with it? Second piece, it says, staff training, professional development. You can use these scenarios to think about how can it encourage innovation? How can it be used to foster a culture of innovation, provide opportunities to experiment with AI tools, and to think about how to share those best practices, and using the scenarios to design targeted training programs for educators for that ethical implementation and for effective integration into your curriculum. I would also think about the skill development. So some of those scenarios are going to spark ideas around skills that need to be critically evaluated, AI generated content, kind of promoting digital literacy among the educators and among students. The third one there, it talks about effective communication and kind of community engagement. So I would think also about how can you use these scenarios to communicate the potential benefits and for people to also understand risk of AI to parents, to students, to the broader community, and kind of help that range of educational partners understand the practical use of it. And then finally, just ethical considerations, kind of bias mitigation. Think about, how do I use the scenarios to really familiarize myself so that I can look at what is that ethical framework and how can I use the scenario to brainstorm with staff, efficiencies, benefit, mitigating risk, considering those AI algorithms and the content. So in conclusion, I feel like if you're proactively addressing AI-related issues, using the scenarios to spark ideas, then school boards and administrators can really, harness this positive side and the power of AI to enhance student learning, to improve your operational efficiencies, and really prepare students for the future they're going to walk into. I'll hand it back over to you, Andrew.
Great. Thank you, Dr. McGrath. I think that's really powerful to hear, specifically from a superintendent, talk about how these things play out. It's a big question mark. We get a lot of questions, and these scenarios can cross, almost every aspect of operations in a district. You get questions about employee evaluations. Can you use AI for IEPs? We've got some scenarios around all of those. So hopefully we can help create some answers to those questions around the state and really move forward in a powerful way. So we'll go ahead and move on to our Q&A. That kind of wraps up the bulk of the content here. And I think we've got some questions in the chat, but I think, Troy, if you've got anything, and the other panelists might be available to answer some of these questions. I think we can go ahead and take a few from chat.
Sure. So to deal with one housekeeping question first before we dive into the more analytical questions, we will be sending a copy of this webinar recording as well as a slide deck that the presenters use to all registrants tomorrow. That's all registrants, not just people who actually logged on to watch the webinar, but everybody who registered to participate, whether they actually did watch the webinar or not, can expect to receive that email tomorrow. Now down to the nitty-gritty. We have a question about policy adoption. Do you do these steps for local policy adoption in regular board meetings or in special board meetings focused on policies? And I know that Sohail wanted to provide some perspective on how Los Angeles Unified School District deals with policy adoption when it relates to AI.
Thank you. I think in our processes, typically is a public meeting when the adoption is happening. But there are pre-planning meetings, either individually to avoid the Brown Act issue. And also there are committee of the whole that usually introduction or presentation are happening. So it's like a pre-planning, a lot of discussion, a lot of time for the public and also the board to be able to discuss and evaluate the impact or the value of the resolution or the policy before it's being adopted or accepted. At least that's our approach. I'm also interested to hear from others. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to talk about their experience at the local level with regard to policy adoption?
I already spoke on it mostly in my statement, but I can't stress enough how important it is to stay current on your policies when you're adopting these. It just makes such a difference in how your school's operating and meeting your mission statements when you are current on your policies, and it keeps you out of legal problems.
Thank you, Susan. Our next question gets at some of the nuances in artificial intelligence and how you define different types of AI and how there might be different types of regulation depending on the nature and purpose of the specific AI you're referencing. The question says, you are using AI to reference all artificial intelligence, but it appears that your examples are focusing on generative AI, not all AI, such as spell and grammar checkers. The large language models that are used for generative AI are changing nearly daily. It seems to me that generative AI are with us now and will continue to improve and are already requiring employees to use generative AI for greater. How can we prepare students for the workforce by banning the use of generative AI? And I don't know if we are proposing the banning of it. I think it's more of a regulation for proper use, but I don't know. Josh, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, I'm trying to come off. Okay. Okay. I think the host has locked my video, so you'll just have to hear my voice instead. Um, so yeah, I mean, to your point, Troy, there are a number of sort of approaches out there depending upon what source you read. Um, there we go. Um, but in general, our approach has been relatively permissive in terms of the use of generative AI, both from students and from staff. Again, with some, I think the default is yes, you can use it, and then there are some restrictions, constraints, limitations that are imposed by the policy. And I think it is very much with that sort of two pieces in mind. One, it's out there anyway, and so we want our employees and our students to use it so that they can benefit from the efficiencies that it offers. It's already being used anyway, so what's the point of trying to ban it if it's going to be used anyway? And then lastly, it really does force us to think about, why would we want to ban AI in a classroom? And in that discussion, and I mentioned this previously, it really came down to when we really sort of peeled back the pieces of the onion. The idea is that we're concerned that AI would prevent students, particularly in that context, from sort of learning the standards that we want them to learn. And so if AI gets in the way of that, be it generative AI or otherwise, like if, to use one of the examples of the question, if it's a spelling test, you shouldn't be able to use Microsoft Spell Check because that kind of defeats the purpose. If it's, I want you to have the experience of learning how to write an essay from scratch, then using an AI at any point in the process defeats the purpose. But if it is, I want you to just to develop your analytical skills around concepts of, I don't know, liberty and freedom, and you use AI to help synthesize some major thinkers out there that helps you with your own analysis, well then that's a great use of AI. So it really sort of forces the conversation around sort of what is the purpose, what is the worry, and I think for the most part that's what led us to a more permissive approach.
Great. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that thorough explanation. We have a question about board policy 6162.6, so we'll be coming back to you, Josh. This is the use of copyright materials, and the member is wondering, how does the use of copyright materials BP come into play with the use of technology policy? Or maybe actually Andrew's going to jump in and answer that.
No, that wasn't me. I was just closing the the question out in the chat.
Okay. Josh?
So the issue of copyright, and it really is an issue not unique to the world of education. I mean, the issue is when a generative AI program pulls from certain sources, could they potentially violate the copyright of that source? So I don't know to a big extent if that is going to be, that will be resolved, in broad terms with, in the larger AI sort of arena, and that will trickle down into the, how it affects education. I mean, it is possible you could use like a chat GPT to say, please let me know what so-and-so said on this topic. And in doing so, you might sort of use some of their copyrighted works. So, as with just like with Google search, right, you have to be careful, with what you use. But I'd say it will be resolved in the court, sort of how copyright issues interact with this. And once that happens, we will then update our policies appropriately. But that hasn't happened yet, so it's still sort of hanging out there.
Thanks once again. We'll stay with you, Josh, since seems to be a lot of interest in the policy aspect. Will it be a standalone CSBA model policy on AI, or will AI only be integrated into existing policies? How will a school district be able to determine whether the provider's AI tool is biased?
So to answer the first question, at this time, there's no plan for a standalone AI policy. As Andrew mentioned, when we sort of have talked about it, we realized that a lot of the sort of policy frameworks that we currently have in place are pretty good. We just need to be, updated to reflect the reality of AI. So the 5 policies we covered, employee and student use of technology, those 2 policies have been updated. Academic honesty, homework and makeup work, and student assessments. So, those were already existing. And so rather than sort of pulling from all of those 5 into one, it sort of made more sense to treat AI like we treat technology more broadly, but again, with a little bit more, specificity in addition to the fact that AI exists. So at this point, integrated into existing policies, and those are the 5 we have. In terms of the second part of the question, how do we know if something's biased? We actually don't always. That's sometimes the challenge. You can, you'd have to have some researcher do a controlled study of, in this particular AI detector context I referenced before, they provided the AI detector with a variety of assignments, some of which were AI generated, some of which were not, both from English learner students and from non-EL students. And then, among other things, I'm sure, they looked at sort of differences in the, likelihood that a paper would be flagged, or, whatever it was. I don't exactly know, it was a paper, an essay, whatever. So, I think it's important if you do, as a district, reach out to a particular AI provider, that you ask them that question, or, research it yourself, and find out, what you can determine about whether or not a particular detector is biased in a particular direction.
Thank you, Josh. So, Hale, I'm wondering if you might have some perspective based on your experience in LAUSD.
Definitely, as Josh mentioned, the first part is just ask the vendor. That comes the transparency. The first rule of AI: be transparent. So if the vendor can disclose the criteria around the evaluation of the selection criteria, then you can test the model. The other thing I would say goes back to the comparing. I mean, if you have multiple products that you can compare, you can see the result of those products with each other. Then you can evaluate if one of them is biased or versus other one has some prevention mechanism. By default, as I said, AI is biased. So the only way to avoid it, if they put the prevention mechanism to be able to reevaluate the results of AI, that's the only way. So if they don't have it and they don't disclose it, you can presume it is biased. With that being in mind, then you need to be aware. With that awareness, use the result with your discretion. Do not accept the result. That, for example, if there is a detection tool that detects this as a cheating, it may not be, and there in many cases could be incorrect what the detection mechanism is.
Thank you. We have another question that looks at this from a statewide perspective. And this member wants to know, are we aware of any state level efforts regarding AI, which may impact our policies and practices? Sohail?
So there, state, as the Department of Education, so far didn't start any serious initiative about it, but the state, as a Department of Technology, under the governor, started the activity. Actually, there is a Gen AI page already built into the CDT, which has a toolkit for the state agencies to framework the guideline of the procurement practices, the selections and implementation, risk assessment for AI implementation. Actually, it was released very recently, is less than probably 3 weeks ago. 2-3 weeks ago, and since then we are working on those material to see how it can help us. Obviously, it's not mandated for the school; it's for state agencies at this point. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but though that portal, which includes documentation, toolkits, and material, it has a step-by-step how to perform the risk assessment against AI. which is very useful tool. And I can share that link. I don't know, maybe I can send it to Troy and Troy can put it in the chat for people.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. We got a question asking, where can I access the chart shown on the slide with the scenarios and possible issues? So this is a good time to promote that the AI task force has an entire web page dedicated to resource and other items to help you navigate this developing issue. You can type into Google or whichever search engine you use, CSBA, AI task force, or something similar, and we should be one of, if not the top results. Also, if you go to the CSBA homepage at csba.org, under our governance section, one of the dedicated menu items says AI task force. And if you click on that, it'll take you to the right page where you can see all the scenarios and a lot of other helpful resources. So I highly recommend anyone with an interest in this topic visit the webpage. Again, under the governance section of our website, or just type in CSBA AI task force into your search engine. We also have another question. I think I'm going to break it down into multiple parts because it's an extended question. The first one is, do you have a series of best practices that individual schools should implement in accordance with given sample policies? For example, what does bias mitigation or management look like in schools? I think we've addressed this in part, but if anyone wants to expand on that.
I'm happy to add that. I don't know of an exhaustive list that exists, but I would say that Heal's 5 points within his slide would be a great start of just kind of a self-check in those 5 components there.
Okay. Thank you, Kimberly. And I'm going to stay with you as someone who's responsible for site leaders as a superintendent. Should principals train and organize teacher teams to have regular meetings to engage in discussions around AI?
I think absolutely each school district and each principal should think through, talking to their staff around where are they with their level of understanding, their level of use. I also think it's about integrating, right? How do you integrate it into your professional development opportunities? How do you model the use of it? How do you encourage classified staff and certificated staff in utilizing it to increase efficiencies while also helping to meet individual student needs? So I think, there is no golden ticket of the exact way to do it. So I think you have to think about, where is your staff? How do you meet their needs where they are? How do you start from a playful, celebratory, let's look into how to utilize this incredible tool to make your life more efficient and meet student needs, and then keep integrating it just as we go along. As we all know, the one and done is not very effective for long-term change, right? So how can you integrate it ongoing into what you're doing with staff?
Thank you. And then one final question. Should schools hire a specific person to manage all AI use? So both Kimberly and Sohail, if you could weigh in on this.
I'm happy to start because, we're in very different size districts, right? Where I have more like 1,100. And so, I would say that every school district across the state of California is different size, has different resources, has, different capabilities, and it is at a different place. So I don't think there's a one correct answer that everyone should hire one person would not be the correct answer. I think you have to think about the different components, right? There's an IT component. There's a, security component. There's an instructional use component. There's an efficiency component. There's classified use. So I think it's thinking through, where is your organization and how can you think of AI as a tool from the positive aspects and from the protection places, and think about where's the next step that my district needs to go, and therefore then think about, is there staffing needed related to different areas?
If I may add just to that, I totally agree. Depending on the size of organization, staffing always defined. Based on what CDT shared with their agencies, the material that Troy is going to share with you, their recommendation for the state agencies, because the size of the state agencies, they are large, the recommendation is each state agency need to have, must have an AI liaison that essentially in charge of all the activity around the AI within that organization, evaluation, criteria, risk assessment, and everything else. With that being said, the work of in instruction is a little bit different. The AI implementation is the work of business and instruction hand in hand. You cannot just say a business person can make a decision on AI or other way around the instruction person. In our district, we have an evaluation criteria that goes for the implementation of AI through the instruction team, through the legal team, through all of these. After vetting process, the product or the resources going to be vetted for the instructional tools. So it's essentially depending on the size of the school, but evaluation must be done with multiple people. You can have one person as a liaison, but that one person cannot be the ultimate decision maker.
Thank you for that. One person is wondering if we have any updates on Senate Bill 1288, who will be invited. There's no new information. The bill doesn't take effect until January 1st, 2025. We are working to make sure that a school board member is represented, but I do not believe that the official roster of the committee has been selected yet. But we're well aware, and we are working behind the scenes to make sure that CSBA membership is included. Another question asked, well, it's more of a comment than a question. And specifically, it's that a member of the AI task force volunteers that we are using the scenarios in our tech committee, which is composed of teachers, administrators, and board members. And that committee is prioritizing and focusing AI attention on training, opportunities for enrichment in teaching and learning, and other areas. At the local level, they surveyed their team and found that voting on the scenarios was a very valuable tool for starting to grapple with this rapidly expanding and changing technology landscape. So that's essentially a recommendation to forming a committee at the local level, which has different types of staff and employees, and using that to focus your attention on AI in certain areas, and even having a sort of a democratic approach to dealing with the issue. The next question asks, how does AI affect security issues with the IT department's inability to protect schools from cybersecurity? Will policies for this department be evaluated and looked at? And then there's a second part we'll get to in a moment. So how does AI affect security issues with the IT departments and their ability to make staff and students safe from cybersecurity violations?
And if I may start, obviously there are many use of AI work in a good way and in a bad way. So as much as the AI is being used by the cybersecurity or security tools nowadays, there is a detection, there is a response that with AI that can detect all of those algorithms. Most of the tools now implementing those function, which reduce the human involvement in performing the threat assessment. In the opposite side of it, the bad actor are using the same technique, same tools to essentially harvest the information, scrub the websites or everything for the phishing attack. The phishing emails probably nowadays you are seeing are more sophisticated. There's no grammar error in them. So they are very well written, and all of those notion or indications that we had in the past about detecting those phishing emails, they are changing. So overall, there's a new landscape for AI in the organizations for which both benefit or harm. The other part of it is if you adopt AI tools, what are the risks of the security of that AI tools, but that or instructional tools I meant. And that goes back to the selection criteria that you are putting during your procurement for data privacy. That's a data privacy matching with the security. And mostly preventing the PII being interacted or entered into the AI is the probably front-ending and protecting and putting the barrier not to put the PII inside the AI or train the model based on the PII data, especially minor students.
Thank you, Sohail. Is there any guidance on how to vet AI tools? Would CSBA be able to develop a list of AI tools that have been vetted for data privacy and security, access and equity, academic integrity, accuracy and credibility, and bias?
I could probably touch on that a little bit, Troy. Without promising too much, because the task force is still working on these issues, but on the first part of the question about guidance on how to vet AI tools, that's absolutely something that the task force wants to try to take on. So they're actively having discussions about, are there checklists or the things that you could put out there as a sort of look fors and things to ask vendors as you're going through those conversations. So that's absolutely something that we view as that the task force views as a next step. I can't speak to whether that's timelines or when that's going to come to fruition. That's something they're looking at as a really important piece. And we've heard that before. The second part is around producing a list of AI tools that have been vetted for data privacy and security, access, equity, academic integrity, so on and so forth. The challenge with that is the pace of change. So we could certainly, take a stab at it and, as a task force really and generate a list, but that list would have to be maintained and those things would have to be reviewed every time an update happens or some new technology is released or a new language model is incorporated. And it's just a lift that we just don't have the capacity to do. So that's something that was talked about. So, that was kind of the idea about doing some like checklists or guidance that were more standardized questions you could ask any vendor and review with a checklist moving forward. So it's not the most ideal answer, but that's kind of where we're trying to find the right path forward.
Okay. Thanks for that, Andrew. I want to circle back to the second half of the question that we addressed earlier. This part is related to policies. Specifically, when will academic honesty, homework, and makeup work and student assessment sample policies be issued? Josh, is that on the agenda, or are there no immediate plans to have specific policies for those topics? Again, academic honesty, homework, makeup work, and student assessment sample policies.
Sorry, Troy, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Well, I was having some audio issues. Can you repeat the question?
When will academic honesty, homework, and makeup work and student assessment sample policies be issued?
They have been issued. So some of them were issued previously, like a number of updates ago, and a couple of them were most recently issued in September of 24. So they've all been updated in the past year, all those 5.
Okay, so there seems to be some confusion on whether or not they were included in the September guides policy package. So if I were a board member who's trying to look up those specific policies, academic honesty, homework and makeup, and student assessment, what would be the best way to track those down?
So usually the update alerts go to the executive assistants connected to the LEA rather than to individual board members. So you can check with your EA to see, what the most recent, if you sort of want to see just like the track changes version. But if you just want to see the current latest version of the sample policies, just log on to Gamut. And again, your EA should be able to provide you that information if you don't have it already. And then, you just scroll through our system and find the numbered policies and, check them out. They're just going to be the most up-to-date versions. And if you, search for, artificial intelligence or AI and, you can track down the paragraphs within those where they mention that.
We have a question about State Bills AB 876 and AB 2876 and how those are factored into the policies. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone from our governmental relations team on this call, so I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with how those bills interact with AI and what impact they might have.
I can speak to 2876. I'm not familiar with 876. But 2876 is the bill that requires AI literacy. So that has more to do with standards and the IQC and sort of what is being taught. So whenever standards are updated, we do update our policies, and so at some it's in the queue for updates in the future. But that bill focuses on just teaching AI, which is a pretty sort of standard thing that schools do. New thing comes up, we teach about it. It doesn't cover as much at all actually like how we would use it by students or by staff, in classrooms and in schools. And again, my apologies, I'm not familiar with 876, and so I can't speak to that one.
I believe the member in the chat said that one also concerns media literacy. So we'll take a look at that, and I'll talk to our governmental relations department, and we can get back to you directly. So thank you for that question. One member says that their district will be presenting on this data privacy and vetting process at our annual education conference on December 5th. So they encourage people to show up. Of course, we always want people to attend AEC and AI. There are a number of workshops on AI we encourage you to attend, including one that I'm involved with, as well as some of our other panelists. So there'll be plenty of information on AI for those of you who join us in Anaheim in December. And I believe that is it. I don't think that there are any other questions. I know there was some information that we wanted to drop in the chat. The chat is closed, but again, we will send out that information to you directly for that generative AI toolkit information that Sohail mentioned. We'll make sure that you get all this info later on. So I will turn it over to Andrew to conclude today's presentation.
Thanks, Troy, and thank you to all our panelists for your expertise and insight. We've got some contact information up here if anybody would like to follow up on any of those questions. You can always reach out. But just thank you, everybody. And in particular, I wanted to shout out a couple of folks. Well, a number of them are here on the call, but first, our Chief of Research Education Policy Development, that's Dr. Naomi Eason, who chairs who's staffs the AI task force, and is the impetus and a lot of the momentum behind the work that they do. And obviously, our chair, Susan Markarian, who's with us today. It's a great work, and our comms team for helping put together the webinar, and Josh and the policy team for doing all this work behind the scenes. We've got a lot of folks. It's a pretty substantial task force. There's 28 folks. We've got folks from the IT departments, superintendents, the board members themselves, and it's just been a really great experience. We're looking forward to sharing more with you as the work continues to unfold. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up here. But thank you, everybody, for participating. Again, we'll follow up with the recording and a copy of the slides, and we'll get you all at AEC, and looking forward to seeing you then. So that's it. Thank you, everybody.